me read for you from the book of Leviticus, not the book of Leviticus. You know, that last night I briefly touched on it. The sanctuary, the sanctuary teaches us more than one lesson. The sanctuary teaches us the lessons of salvation. That's we all know, and that's probably the most important lesson that we can ever learn, because that's a lesson that we will be grateful for in eternity, the lesson of salvation. But it also teaches us something about God. You know, God is revealing Himself in the sanctuary. You cannot know much about God without seeing Him in His sanctuary. I shared last night with those present that when I was a student in the 90s, when I was taking my doctoral program at Andrews University, I wasn't a sponsored student, so I had to work hard for all those years, and I was working as a mover for a moving company. And you know, you get to know people really well the moment you enter the house. You know, you can know people for months and years, but once you enter into the house, you know more about them than you would learn in years otherwise. So that's has been my experience, and God is inviting us into His house. God is inviting us into His place. Why? Because not because He wants to be moved, right? But because He wants us to be moved by who He is. Because He wants us to get to know Him better. And the only way to know God better is to see Him in the sanctuary, in His sanctuary. He is inviting us into His home. But it is not only about God that we are learning. We are also learning about the nature, about creation as we are entering the Holy Temple. Because the sanctuary, the tabernacle, is made out of materials that represent all the created order. Starting with organic material and gold and precious stones and animal material and everything. All the created order is represented in the sanctuary, but it is a separate, amazing and interesting topic we cannot afford covering. And also, the sanctuary teaches us some incredible lessons about ourselves, about men and women. It teaches us the lessons that can never be learned in any other place. You see, you all know what's inside of the tabernacle. You all know about the items. You enter the courtyard, you see the altar, you see the laver where the priest would wash his hands and his feet and his face, all the parts of the body that were not covered. And then the priest would have a glimpse of himself for the first time. You know, in the old days, the men would not look at themselves very much in the mirror. They wouldn't, you know. The women would always do it. And as a result, you know, the Lord would teach us a lesson, because the laver was made out of women's glasses, women's mirrors. Out of women's mirrors. So the priest would have to look at himself, you know. Because you have to look at yourself, you have to look inside yourself and find out who you are. And as soon as the priest would enter into the holy place, yes, we know that he would see the candlestick, that he would see the table of showbread, that he would see the altar of incense, but there's something else that he would see, something very, very profound, and something that you would never miss. You know, something that moves, something that resembles something that has a special meaning to you. What is it? You! Because the first thing you see when you enter into the holy place, and also into the most holy place, you see your own reflection in the golden mirrors that are on both sides, and in the most holy place on three sides. sense. So you see yourself from every imaginable angle. You get to know, you enter by faith, you enter the sanctuary of the Lord. And that's how you learn who you really are. There is no way to learn so deeply who we truly are unless we enter the holy place. And to remain forever young, you know, there is a place where time stops. That's the most holy place. When you enter into the presence of God, when you enter into the presence of Shekinah, when you enter into this most holy place, time stops. If you spend enough time in the most holy place, but let me read now. Okay, let me, since it's working now, let me briefly show you what I'm not doing. Okay, this is something that you've done last night. Okay, that's what I'll be briefly doing this afternoon. We'll talk about the Day of Atonement and the significance behind it. You see, the teaching about the sanctuary is not found in one specific particular book. The sanctuary is all over the Bible. That's one of those teachings that you need all the Bible to study. But in three particular books of the Bible, they are focusing on the sanctuary in a special way. And those books are in the midst of the first 5 books of the Bible, in the midst of the Pentateuch. The first book is, so Genesis and Deuteronomy, those are historical books that surround the sanctuary books. The sanctuary books in the Bible are mostly Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. And again, interestingly enough, three books. And those 3 books, roughly speaking, they are reflecting on 3 different apartments and on 3 different functions of the sanctuary. The book of Exodus is mostly dealing with what? With the objects in the sanctuary. How it's done. What are the dimensions? What are the shapes? What are the materials used? How they look like? How they station in the sanctuary. So you know all the logistics. You get this pattern. Moses received the pattern, the heavenly pattern, and after this pattern, the sanctuary is been built. So you get to know the structure. You get to know the material part of it. Then, as you continue to the book of Leviticus, you'll find out what is to be done in this sanctuary, what is to be done in between of those objects of the sanctuary. And so, in other words, it describes the priestly ministry, what the priest would do as he enters the sanctuary service. That's the book of Leviticus. And the book of Numbers is dealing with the timing of the service. So it's not just the objects, not just the sanctuary, not just the priest serving in the sanctuary, but time of the service is of crucial importance. You see, the book of Numbers is all about the seasons. What to do on this season and what to do on that season. What not to do on this season and what not to do on that season. You see, God has everything on His schedule. So this is something that people usually don't understand, because people consider God as timeless God. That God is so remote from us that He is not really, looking at His watch. Well, He does. He does. And the message of the sanctuary is not just a message of what God is doing, but when God is doing this. That's also important. I don't know. For me, I live in flesh. I need to know about times. I need to know about time. So the message of the sanctuary is also the message about times. And the Day of Atonement, to understand the Day of Atonement, we need to consider all of those three aspects. First of all, the setting. What are the objects that used in the service on this day? The priest who is doing this service, and also the time of this service. Because you cannot do the Day of Atonement just at your pleasure, at any day you want, just because you feel like it. No, there is something else to it. You know, we are not always free to set our time. God sets His own times on it. So we'll talk about it in the afternoon. You know, about the origin of this festival. We'll talk about the prophetic importance of it. We'll give a summary of it. Of course, it's just a brief summary because we have such a limited time. Normally, I teach this course in 2 or 3 months, and you know, students, they have to read a lot, they have to write papers, and we have discussion groups and so on, and we have at least 30 hours of class lectures, you know. But by the grace of God, the same message will fully present today. So, yeah, we'll talk about this ritual, we'll talk about the scapegoat, we'll talk about the importance of entering the most holy place by the priest. We'll touch on how the pioneers have discovered the sanctuary and how it developed into what we now have as the doctrine of the sanctuary. And I've been, by the grace of God, teaching the doctrine of the sanctuary for many years, and from my experience I can tell that it is such an immense topic. You can never finish studying it. It has so many different aspects to it, and what the pioneers have discovered, of course, it was great, but that was not all of it. That was not all of it. So, consider the ends. We already started considering the ends this morning. So I want you to consider something else about the ends, because that's what the Bible says. We have to learn something from the ends, and that's something that is important for us. You know, we have to learn how the ends are moving, because there are some lessons for us. You know, we were missionaries in the Philippines for many years, and in this country you don't fight with ants, you cohabit with them. They own the place, you just visit them, right? So it's absolutely unrewarding, you know, trying to get rid of the ants in your house. You know, they have a different mentality. So, yeah, after a while we just stopped fighting and we let the ants to do their own fight. And we discovered that, you know, the less we fight, the less ants we have. Because once one group of the ants takes over the house, all other ants are gone. But once you start fighting those ants, then other ants are coming. So we just left them alone, and yes, they were peacefully, just as cockroaches, yes, peacefully. Cockroaches, mice, and many other domestic animals. But you know, I learned important lessons from the ants, and you know, you need time for everything. Even to learn from the ants, you need time. You know, and once I got this opportunity, because I got sick for a few days, I got sick, so I couldn't really get out much out of my bed, so I was just laying and staring at the ceiling. And guess what you see on your ceiling? The ants trail, of course, the ants trail. So I was privileged to observe the formation and the correction of the ants trail. So let's you know, roughly speaking, this. They discovered, the pioneers ants, they discovered a great place at the attic. A great dry place, you know, where they can, live comfortably and grow their babies and so on. But since they need food, they have to go out. So they made this nice trail from the window. And you know, you never really close the window because it's hard. But they would always find, you know, an opening. So they would come through the window, then they would go up the wall, and then they would go across the room to the next corner, and over there they would, you know, they made a hole and they would go to the attic. So that was an interesting trail. So, anyways, the first day when the ants just discovered this precious place at the attic, you know, the trail that the pioneers ants made, it was going like this, you know, wiggling all over. They didn't know really where to go. They knew that there must be a better place. They knew that there must be an upper level. So they were seeking for it, they were looking for it. And so the trail was, you know, going like this. So I said, wow, foolish little things, you know. I would go just straight. Anyways, the same day, by the evening, I noticed an improvement in this trail. It started to look more straight, because the ants, they have those spy ants that go and explore. They go to the left, they go to the right, and they all leave a chemtrail. So they are looking for some shortcuts. They are always looking for the ways to improve it. They found a great place, they found a great attic, they found, you know, a marvelous shelter for themselves, and, you know, the road is, it's not too far, but it can always be improved. To make the story short, in 2 days, you have a straight path, a straight line. Now, why I'm telling you this? Because when the Adventist pioneers, more than 150 years ago, discovered this path to the sanctuary, discovered this path to the high place, to this theological attic, to the crown of the Bible. You know, that was a great discovery. That was a great discovery that brought them on the, really onto the upper room, to the upper ground. But the question is now, should we learn from the ants, or should we just blindly follow the path of the pioneers? Because, you know, I've been teaching theology for decades now, and I know that the pioneers, and I've been teaching Adventist theology as well, that the pioneers would not always go the straight line. You know, they would go this way because they were explorers, they were exploring, they were finding new things, they were pioneering. They would go turn right, they would turn left, they would go this way, they would go that way. You know, and our task is not to denounce the Arctic. Our task is not to stop the flow, this, you know, to the upper movement. Our task is not just blindly follow the chemtrail that the pioneers have left. Our task is to reach to this attic, but to look for even better ways. That's what we are doing. That's what we are doing. You know, some people say, oh, you know, because this way is so wiggling, we don't need it. We don't want to walk this way. It's too long. But as we learn from the ants, the wiggly way does not discourage them. They know how to make it more straight. So what we are doing now in our theology, we are not denouncing this marvelous place, this marvelous revelation. But we are looking for simple access to this place. More simple access to this place. After all, if we don't learn in 150 years, then we might be not good students, right? We are to follow the path of the pioneers, but we are to do it with intelligence and with wisdom. Leviticus 23, I will read from verse 26. Leviticus 23, verse 26 and on. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, also, the 10th day of this 7th month shall be the day of atonement. It shall be a holy convocation for you. You shall afflict your souls and offer offerings made by fire to the Lord. And you shall do no work on that same day, for it is the day of atonement, to make atonement for you before the Lord your God. For any person who is not afflicted in soul on that same day shall be cut off from his people. So that's the day of atonement that starts on the 10th day of the 7th month. Right? And that's something that helped the Millerites to figure out, or what, as they thought they figured it out, the time of Christ coming home, coming to this earth. We'll talk about, this mistake that they calculated the time correctly, but the event, because of the century, was neglected for so many centuries. For so many centuries, God was not seen as the God doing something in the century. For centuries, people forgot that God has done and still doing something for them. It was all the church that was doing something. God seemed to be idle in this picture. What was rediscovered in 1844 was truly not the doctrine, that was the character of God, who cares about our salvation and who works on behalf of our salvation, even right now. But in chapter 25 of the same book, Leviticus, in my Bible it's just on the opposite page, just exactly the opposite to what I just read. We read another interesting statement, Leviticus 25:8. And you shall count 7 Sabbaths of years for yourself, 7 times 7 years, and the time of the 7th Sabbath of years shall be to you 49 years. So that's a jubilee that the Bible is talking about, jubilee. And now take a note of this, verse 9. Then you shall cause the trumpet of the jubilee to sound on what day? On the 10th day of the 7th month. That was the day of atonement. Yes. Then you shall cause the trumpet of the jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month. On the day of atonement, you shall make the trumpet to sound throughout all your land. All your land. Now, friends, this morning I would like to address just this specific aspect. I believe what I'm going to share with you, maybe I would say, I don't think you've been aware of it. I want to share with you something that we don't normally share, but something that presents an enormous interest to anyone who is interested in the sanctuary. And what is it? This, how, I want to show, you see, because I know the currents and undercurrents of Adventist theology, and I know, and I have to admit regretfully, that the sanctuary theology is not the most popular today, even among the Seventh-day Adventist scholars. But you know, the Lord always has a way to teach us a lesson. And you know how the Lord would teach lessons to the Israelites in the past. He would teach them lessons through other nations that were surrounding them. Sometimes those were, you know, bitter lessons to learn. Yeah. So I want us to look at the year 1844, and you know, in the afternoon we'll look at the prophetic dimension of it. We'll look at the biblical, at the Bible pointing at this year. But I want you now to look at this year from the perspective of other tribes, from the perspective of other people groups, not from the Adventist perspective, but from the perspective of other people. Because really, this year, you know, somehow we feel like not putting too much emphasis on this, and at the same time, for many people who are not Seventh-day Adventists, this year is of a crucial importance. So I'd like to share it with you. And before I do, I would like to tell you this. See, when you hear a loud sound, well, let's say a car horn, what would it tell you? Yeah, attention, yeah. But okay, let's say you just hear it, but you don't see a car, you don't see who is honking, you don't know what's going on. You know that something is going on. You know that somebody is blocking the way, or maybe somebody had an accident, or somebody is being impatient. You know, many reasons why people would do it. You hear the noise, you hear the sound, but you don't know what's going on. And you come up with all kinds of ideas. Maybe that's not that important that you would speculate too much on it, what's going on, right? But when the sound of this trumpet is in the air, there is a great difference between people who know what this trumpet is all about and the people who don't know what the trumpet is all about. But what is that they have in common, that both groups of people, they hear it. They hear the sound, they hear the trumpet, they hear that something is going on, that something big is happening, but they can't figure out what is this noise, why? And what is the reaction? Because the trumpet sound is heard all over the world, right? All over the land. So what would be people's reaction? Yeah, we read this. Let me read this interesting quote from Adventist Review. Adventism was born in the mid-19th century, the same century that saw the birth of movements and ideologies that have shaped the modern world. Romanticism, German idealism, French positivism, nationalism, Darwinism, Marxism, and Nietzscheanism. This shared chronological origin had been not accidental, but providential. The call to fear and worship the Creator God diametrically counters the self-deifying, heaven-storming passions, ideas, and themes at the heart of this radical ideologies. Indeed, if you look, you know, I'm a historian. I love history. You know, that's my passion. You know, I have three major academic passions. One is for history, one is for the Book of Revelation, and one is for sanctuary. Those are my triple passion. So, anyways, you know from the history, it doesn't take a historian to recognize that until the middle of the 19th century, there was little change in people's life for centuries and millennia. Little change. same life for as far as you can see into history. And all of a sudden, and it's still a mystery, what is it that happened in the middle of the 19th century? All of a sudden, you have those great inventions. All of a sudden, you have electricity. All of a sudden, you have a steam power. All of a sudden, you have engine. All of a sudden, you have radio. All of a sudden, you have telephone. All of a sudden, you have totally different, radically different lifestyle that those inventions brought. What happened? How come that in one century, the knowledge increased in millions times more than in all the previous centuries and thousands of years of human history? How come that in 6,000 years humans invented the wheel, and that was about it? And then every day the knowledge doubles. How come? And the dividing line, it's 1844, and it's not the Adventist people who say it, who teach it. Somehow we kind of ignore it, more and more. But okay, let's go back. What was the 10th day of the 7th month? Where did the Millerites? How did the Millerites figure that October 22nd was of a special importance to them? They just looked at the Jewish calendar, yes, at the Karaite Jews who were really the record keepers of the nations, and the Day of Atonement was on the October 22nd. Actually, that was the night of October 22nd to October 23rd. That was the Day of Atonement according to the Jewish calendar. Now, so we all know that Seventh-day Adventist Church originated on that night. Now, let me ask you this question. Are you aware of any other religious movement or religious denomination that originated on that very night and worldwide? And it is a denomination that considers themselves a remnant. It is a denomination that considers its goal as a proclamation of the coming, of the soon coming of the Messiah. And this is a denomination that believes that its origin on the October 22nd, same day, 1844, is a fulfillment of the prophecies. Are you aware of any other church? Jehovah's Witnesses? No, not necessarily. No. Yes, there is. You know, interestingly enough, let me read. It is October 23rd. Have you heard about Baha'i? Yeah. Baha'i. Baha'i religion originated on the night October 22nd, 1844. And for them, it is a prophetic fulfillment. For them, it has this prophetic significance that their origin is on this particular day. And how did they learn about it? I'll mention it briefly. This is not my goal to introduce you to this religion. Yes. But what is interesting? How those people could hear this trumpet and interpret it in their way. And who were those people? Those were the people in Persia. Those were the people in the Middle East. Those were the people who were Muslims. Those were the people who never touched the Bible. Those were the people who never heard about Jesus Christ. Those were the people who were loyal, faithful Muslims. And all of a sudden, on October 22nd, the people who were looking, the radical Muslims of those days, the Muslims who were looking for the promised Messiah, for the hidden Imam. You know, Quran has this teaching about the hidden Imam. All of them, all of those people who were looking for this hidden Imam, they came to realize that they found this hidden Imam on the night of October 22nd. That's a long and very interesting story. I have it in my book, so maybe one day you'll be able to read this story. And Bab became the founder of this religion that originated on the same day. So both Adventism and Baha'i come with the claim of being the remnant in their respective religions. They believe, the Baha'i people, they believe there's a remnant among the Muslims. They believe that the Muslim religion is like an Old Testament to the New Testament. That the Muslim religion was just given for a period of time. And on October 22nd, 1844, the time of the Muslim religion was expired prophetically. And now the true Muslims were entering the new dispensation, the new time, the time that prepares, that paves the way for the Blessed One to come, for the Messiah to come. How did they discover it? How they found it? You know, the trumpet was heard all over the place. But people who don't have the Bible, of course, you know, you need an interpretation, right? It's like speaking in tongues. You need an interpreter. You need an interpreter. So, and by the way, interesting enough, the Baha'i movement today has the same number, the same membership, about 19 millions as the Seventh-day Adventists. And a few years ago I was teaching in Singapore, and they stationed us at the conference headquarters in downtown Singapore. And when I came to the window, you know, of our room, I could see the sign that the same identical building across the street. It was the headquarters, the regional headquarters of Baha'i movement. Same building, same floor, same style of a sign, even. And I said to myself, wow, that's interesting. That's interesting. So they also consider themselves a remnant, you know. They also consider themselves as the people who prepare the way for the Blessed One, for the Messiah. But I have to tell you, you know, to discourage you from Baha'i religion. Because I don't want to intrigue you too much about it. You know, they've gone quite far from what they originally been teaching. They now became very much, you know, postmodern and very much ecumenical, and now they believe that, you know, yes, something really important took place on October 22nd, 1844, but what is it? And they are now joining with the New Agers, because you know, did you know that according to the New Agers, the age of Aquarius, have you heard about the age of Aquarius? Do you know when it starts? When it started? October 22nd, 1844. How do they know? Not from the Bible. You know, at least the Baha'i people took it from Quran. They came from Quran to this date. The New Agers, the New Age people, they arrived to this date from observing the stars. They say, you know, because they relate everything to the stars, they are deeply into not just astronomy, but astrology as well. So they say that in October 1844, the stars at the universe line up in a special way, and since the stars affect everything that's going on, we have entered the new age, the age of Aquarius. And what is this age of Aquarius? It is a preparation. It is a preparation for. It is the last dispensation. It is the last time before the world embraces peace and love and all this. So, you know, they are very, very much ecumenical. They believe in the transformation of the world, in the evolution of the world, and they believe that 1844 is the beginning of this new transformative age of Aquarius that will bring all people into this universal fellowship of love and understanding and unity, and when all religions will come together, you know, and all this. Yeah, so that's what they believe. You see, there is a counterfeit religion. There is a counterfeit religion. Also, you see, if you have counterfeit money, what does it mean? What does it tell you? That they are real money. That they are real money. Yes, that they are real money. So, yeah. So, Baha'i faith considers 1844 as the end of the Islamic and the beginning of the Messianic dispensation. And how they calculated it, it's very interesting, you know, just for curiosity's sake for you. The establishment of the militant Islam, it was the year 622. Remember when Hijrah happened, when Muhammad went from Mecca to Medina, that is an official starting point of Islam. It's 622. It's presumed 1260 years period of the oppression and violence, especially to Christians, ends up, according to Babism, in 1844. We recall that the prophetic month equal 30 calendar years. Thus, 42 months are 1260 calendar years. The Pope declared the end of the dispensation of Muhammad. You know, in Islam, they also have a prophecy about 1260 days or years. So they didn't have to go far. They would find it right in the Bible. But now, as you add 1260 years to 622, what do you have? Do you have 1844? Do you? How come? I don't get that much. I don't get that much. Well, maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe you're not good either. But no, they don't give. But why? Why? The Islamic calendar, or Hijri calendar, is a lunar calendar consisting of 12 months in a year of 354 or 355 days. It is issued to date events in many Muslim countries and used by Muslims everywhere to determine the proper days on which to celebrate Islamic holidays and festivals. The year 1844 is 1260 years after the 662. This is really amazing. And interestingly enough, you see, I'm an Adventist theologian. I'm the sanctuary theologian. I will call myself a sanctuary theologian because I believe in the sanctuary. I believe that the sanctuary provides this binding cord for both the Old Testament and the New Testament. You know, but at the same time, I have to say that many Adventist theologians, they lose this focus and they are not that much interested in prophecies. They are not that much interested in the fulfillment of 2,300 days, you know, on 1844. But you know who's interested? You know, there is a Baha'i movement. They borrowed our interpretation and they said, look, the Bible also says that the prophetic period of 2,300 years ends up on 1844, and they take it quite seriously. They are taking it quite, well, praise God, somebody's taking it seriously. So, I just wish those were not Muslims but Christians, but, well, what can you do? So, they adopted our interpretation as well. So they derive from the Bible, they derive from Quran, and I will now move faster. I see my wife already starts just slightly, slightly pulling this rope, You will find that Hindu people also believe that 1844 is a crucial year, is the beginning of the last dispensation. You will find that the age of Aquarius, or the New Ages people, believe that the age of Aquarius arrived around 1844. There is a representative group of celebrated astrologists, the New Age thinkers, who believe that the year 1844 inaugurates the beginning of the New Age. The proponents of this view explain that in 1844 the stars and the planets lined up in such way that it gave rise to the new dispensation. Right? So there are volumes and volumes of books written about it. Very numerical interpretations have been advanced to point at 1844, not by Adventist people, but the secular people, as the beginning of the New Age by this group. David Davidson, in The Great Pyramid, its Divine Message, claims that the records of the Great Pyramid, inch for a year symbolism, refers to 1844 as the time of the expiration date of the long periods of, for some reason they believe in this 262 years from Hindu religion. So, anyway, Davidson says, Bible scholars say that the Grand Gallery typifies or indicates the Christian dispensation extending from the date of the birth of Christ to the year 1844, which is shown by the great step. According to the Pyramid Message, this year 1844 marks the opening of a new era of dispensation. And in the light of modern history, we might well call this the dawn of the era of creative and mental sciences. Zionism was born in 1844, and Zionism is one of the most formative political, religious, and social movements of these days. I will skip through it, but that's an official time when Zionism was born, and at this very year the Edict of Toleration was issued that would allow Jews to settle in the Holy Land for the first time in more than 1500 years. Can you imagine? In 1844. Worth Smith points out, in the year 1844, the Muslims under the leadership of Turkey were compelled by the Western powers, notably England, to grant religious toleration to all nations within their borders. So Zionism, and it's interesting that it's another counterfeit, There's another attempt to explain this trumpet message. You hear the noise, you are trying to interpret it. Without Christ, it's impossible. But still, we have to admire that people listen to this and trying to do their best, right? Zionism is a literal attempt to gather the remnant. You see how they're all different? Because the message is pretty much the same. The message is the Jubilee message or the Three Angels message. That's the message. But every message has a counterfeit message. Zionism is a literal attempt to gather the remnant of the Jewish people, the remnant, restore the former glory of the temple. Again, the temple. Only we are talking about the temple in heaven. They are trying to build the temple on earth. And to take a messianic lead among the nations. That's what we were called for. We were called to be this messianic movement among the nations. Seventh-day Adventist Church also claims to be a gathering place for the remnant. It also very concerned with the promotion of the glory of the heavenly sanctuary, and also strives toward its full messianic mission. Marxism was born in 1844. That was an important time in life of Karl Marx. His economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844 became foundational for the development of Marxism, this atheistic philosophy, atheistic political and social movement. And I was born in the country that does not exist anymore, in the former Soviet Union. So I know how serious it was. You know, here the Marxism was never, you know, never landed fully, but it landed on, you know, firmly on both feet in Western Europe and in the Soviet Union, and that was a ferocious beast. Ferocious beast. God was out of the picture. God's people were persecuted and destroyed by this beast. Because you see, Satan is also aware about this time, and Satan is doing his best that the blessings of the Jubilee would not be received by God's people. So that's why all of the most devastating philosophies were born on this year. Evolutionism, Charles Darwin was forced to publish the first edition of his Origin of the Species in 1844. Why? Because there was another guy, you know, stepping on his, you know, toes already. Yes, Mr. Wallace, who was about to publish the book about evolutionism. So, and of course, Charles Darwin, he was a very, very ambitious man. So he wouldn't let the glory go to another man. And although the book was not ready, he decided to publish it in 1844, and he did. So that's why we know him and not Wallace as the, you know, as the great guy. Well, not in my perspective, but anyways. No. So interestingly, how he was pushed into this. Spiritualism was born on 1844 because it is in this year the father of the spiritualism, as they call him, Andrew Jackson Davis. He received his first revelations and he started his teaching. Psychiatric Association, well, you tell me what does it have to do with 1844, but interestingly enough, it also emerged on 1844. And, you know, I think it was also one of the counterfeit revivals that Satan was pushing, because you know, I've written some articles on this topic. The extent of the abusive power that this psychiatric claimed and employed, as well as the cruelty of the treatment that it habitually exercised, could only be compared to that of the medieval Inquisition. Psychiatrists have always used coercion or torture to cure insanity, and they never succeeded. Interestingly enough, they never succeeded, but they always experimented with torturing people, with making their treatment more and more cruel. And the use of